Hi, it's Mountain Mom. Today we're going to talk about how to prep a kid's bike for that first springtime ride. We pulled the bikes out of the garage today. We're going to clean them up, check the tires, check the brakes. You ready? Let's do it.
Hey everyone, this is Mountain Dad. First, let's talk about a few simple tools and supplies you're going to need for this. You're going to need some metric Allen keys, a bike pump, an air pressure gauge, a spare tube, some tire levers, some protective gloves, some residue-free degreaser, some chain lube, and some spare shop towels that you don't mind destroying.
All right, we just got this bike down from the garage. We're going to give it a quick visual check and make sure that it's got all its parts. It's ready to go.
All right, so first we're going to check all our bolts and quick releases to make sure everything's secure. Looking at your wheel attachments, so a lot of times they have quick release levers like the seat post here. You can easily pull and tighten up. But oftentimes you have these hex bolts as well, sometimes even just like a regular kind of bolt head on them. I'm also going to check this seat post clamp. So that's pretty loose. You don't want it to be quite so loose. Usually you just tighten up the other side a quarter turn at a time. Just find a tension that's, hard to close, not extremely difficult, but isn't gonna just pop loose on you. So pedals are typically a little bit unique. On the drive side, they're typically gonna be righty-tighty, lefty-loosey. But usually on the left side, they're gonna be the opposite. They're gonna be left-hand threaded. So I'm gonna go ahead and get out my trusty Allen keys. Snug that up a bit. That's nice and snug now. Shouldn't have to worry about that coming loose. You don't want these bars going forward or backward on them when they're riding. So get them a little quick half turn snug. You just don't want something crazy happening to your kid's bike while they're riding it that a simple tightening could fix. Make sure the ends of the handlebar are covered by these plastic or rubber ends. If there's exposed handlebar, that can seriously injure your child.
So we're gonna check the tires on this one's bike to see if they have enough pressure, if they're holding air. Typically you wanna pump up the tires and then leave it overnight, check it the next day, make sure nothing's leaking. If something's leaking, then go ahead and just change the tube. Start the year off right with a fresh new tube.
A tube? Hi.
10 PSI.
So we're a little low.
Yep. All right, I'm pumping up my youngest's bike. Just attaching the pump here. You want to give it a few good pumps.
All right, that looks pretty good.
So we let this bike sit overnight after pumping up the tires, and you can tell on the front it's definitely still flat. So we're gonna go ahead and replace the tube. First we got to take off the tire, and to do that we use these little tire levers. They're really cheap, they're inexpensive, and it just kind of is a crowbar that goes beneath the rim in between the tire. You put two on, space them out until you can take that tire all the way off. Let me show you. Probably should have taken the tire off of the bike before taking the tire off of the rim. There it is. Gotta find the little hole in the rim. Okay, I'm gonna pump this up, put a little air in it before we reattach the tire. One thing I like about this mini Morph air pump that we have is that it can pump up both Schrader and Presta valves. Okay, we're gonna take a peek inside. The tube is holding a little air. Now we want to seat that tire back on, because if you fill up that tube too much, you won't be able to get the tire back on. And you want to have a nice seal between the rim and the tire edge right here. good rule of thumb is you want it nice and firm to the touch. An even better way to tell if you have enough air pressure in there is to get a tire pressure gauge. So next we're going to check the brakes. So when you have your brake cables resting for a long time, they can stretch out. So we want to make sure that the cable tension is good. That looks a little loose. We'll probably have to tighten that up. We're also going to check in here that the rim brakes are hitting where they should. We're going to adjust any of the spacing that might happen in there. So there's two ways you can adjust this. The first is this barrel adjustment right here. Just loosen this. It actually makes this casing longer so that it will engage a little bit. Here, we'll go.
Wow.
The other way to adjust your brake tension is right here. If you get an Allen wrench, loosen this up, pull just a few millimeters of this brake cable forward and then tighten it back up. That will give you a little bit more of that tension on the brake line so that you can brake easier. So now we're going to spin it and check for the spacing on the brakes.
So if you listen closely, you can usually hear when it's going to rub, and you're kind of looking in that gap just to see if the rim's going to make contact at any given point. If it is making contact, it could be that your brakes need adjusting. It could also be that your rim needs adjusting. Your rim might be out of true. So if you're getting a real big wobble in the wheel and it's pushing over into the pad, you want to take it into a bike shop and get your wheels trued. In order to do the rear adjustment, we're going to want to back out our changes to the barrel adjuster just to make sure that we have the maximum amount of range possible when we adjust that later. Since we don't really have enough slack in that barrel adjuster to take everything, all the tension, we're going to go ahead and just adjust it here at the back. So we need to squeeze that together. We can disconnect this little guy here. And that'll give us plenty of slack to work with as we're adjusting this. It'll make it a lot easier without having a bunch of spring tension on the cable. So removing that releases all the tension. And we don't need to go crazy with it. Just a couple millimeters is probably all we really need. Tighten it back up. Give it a good snug firm. You don't have to go again crazy with it. Nice hand tight. Let's see if we can see that difference now. Put that down. That's annoying to have in your hand while you're trying to do this. There we go. All right, that should be seated. Oh, and that gives us much firmer lever feel with the brakes. Another thing that can occur is one side can be much looser than the other side, and that's an issue with these tension adjustments. These control how much spring force is applied to each lever, and so if you're getting rubbing or the spacing's way off, you're going to need to adjust those. It's really easy to do. Basically, you just want a righty-tighty, lefty-loosey. So if this is the side that's tight, we're going to go ahead and these screws are a little stripped, so bear with me. We're going to give it a little tweak. Doesn't take much, just a couple turns. We can actually loosen the other side as well if we start running out of threads. Now we can see that that wheel is much more centered between the brake pads, giving you a more balanced brake feel and better stopping power. All right, to get these brake pads cleaned up, first we need to drop the wheel. Let's do a visual inspection, look for any damage that may have occurred. These look pretty clean. There's some glazing. You can see how it's kind of shiny. And we're also looking for wear. These look like they have quite a bit of wear life left in them. There's still plenty of channel left in these pads. But we're going to try and get rid of this glazing a little bit to make the brakes work a little bit better. All you need is just a little bit of sandpaper, some 120 grit's fine. Just give it a little rub. You don't need to go crazy with it. You can see it just coming off. And that will help your brakes work a little bit better. Glazing happens when you press on the brakes for a while. They get hot and they create that glazing, and then they don't grip the rim as good. So looking at it again, you can see that most of that shiny stuff has been removed now. With just a little bit of effort, your brakes are going to work considerably better. So one thing we need to do is clean and lubricate this chain. You're going to want something like a lint-free cloth. This is just a microfiber cloth. And you're going to want some degreaser, preferably something with no residue. Because after we're done cleaning and letting it dry, we're going to go ahead and lubricate it so that it shifts nice and smooth. You don't want to spray necessarily directly on the train. You'll notice over here, this bike has a disc brake. And we don't want any contamination on the disc brake, or it could contaminate the pads, and then you got to change those out. So it's important. I just kind of spray it right on the cloth. And then you're just going to go ahead and run the chain through like this. It's nice and easy. Depending on how dirty it is, it might take a little time. You might want to rotate that cloth. You can see we have some dirt on there, even though this chain is in pretty good shape, really. Go ahead and spray some more degreaser on there. So another option is you can buy one of these chain cleaning tools. They're pretty inexpensive. They have a bunch of different brushes, and they're useful for getting in a little bit deeper if you have a bike that you care a little more about. The downside is you can get a little spray action. The brushes, as you're pushing the chain through, can kind of contaminate. So it's kind of a good combo. Spray a little degreaser in there. And what you do is just set the chain down into the brushes. And to kind of help keep the contamination down and the overspray down, I just cover it with a cloth. Then, once you've kind of given it a scrub, make sure to wrap it again with the cloth, let it get cleaned off. Any residue of that degreaser, the more you can clean off, the less it has to dry. So now we've had a chance for the chain to dry out. We're gonna apply some chain lube. There's lots of different brands, lots of different kinds. They're mostly pretty good. What you're really just looking for is some dry chain lube. There's also something called wet lube, which is better for wet conditions and riding. But for general bike maintenance, dry lube is typically your best bet. It's really easy to apply. Again, I've got my nitro gloves on. And all you're gonna have to do here is pedal your chain through. I'm just doing the applicator. You don't need to squeeze a bunch on here, right? And we don't want to pedal, or we don't want to move the chain really quickly. We want to have a chance for that lube to land on every link. We're just going to do a couple of passes. We don't want to over apply and get oversprayed potentially. So I'm just going to run the chain a couple of times, just a gentle squeeze. And this is something you should do really every few bike rides, is give your chain a good clean and get the lube on there. It'll help your drivetrain last longer and shift better. There's really no downside to doing this other than spending less than 5 minutes. One thing we want to make sure we do is make sure that the drivetrain is shifting correctly. So what you want to do is just start spinning the pedals and use the shifter to move up and down the gears to make sure everything's smooth. The biggest thing you're looking for, though, is really that you're not going to have any chain jump and lose the chain. Your drivetrain is probably going to be in varying states depending on how often you do maintenance. This one's pretty good. A little bit of skipping, but in general, it's pretty well adjusted. If you are having some issues with that chain jumping into the chain guard that we have here, make sure to take it to a bike shop. You can adjust it pretty easily, but while it's easy to adjust, it's hard to get it right. So if you're getting to a point where the chain is jumping or it's really sloppy, unless you're very mechanically inclined, I would just recommend taking it into a local bike shop and have them do a quick tune-up.
That's it. Once you have all of your bikes down, gave them a wash, checked the tires, checked the brakes, done a visual inspection, then you're ready to go out on a first family bike ride of spring. If you have any questions, go ahead and leave them in the comments below, like and subscribe, and you can check out all of the biking gear that we recommend at mountainmomandtots.com/gear/biking. We'll see you in the outdoors.